The Opium Wars, which took place between 1839 and 1860, were two conflicts between China and Western powers, primarily the British Empire, over issues related to trade, sovereignty, and foreign influence in China. These wars played a crucial role in shaping modern Chinese history and marked a turning point in East-West relations. The conflicts were triggered by disputes over the British trade of opium, the sovereignty of the Qing dynasty, and the impact of foreign economic interests in China. They resulted in significant territorial and economic concessions from China to Western powers, most notably the cession of Hong Kong to Britain and the opening of various Chinese ports to international trade. Background: China and the West before the wars. For centuries, China had maintained a closed-door policy toward foreign trade, restricting interactions with other nations to specific controlled exchanges. The Qing dynasty, which had ruled China since the mid-17th century, believed in the cultural and economic superiority of the Chinese Empire and had little interest in goods from the West. European countries, particularly Britain, on the other hand, were increasingly interested in gaining access to China's vast markets, particularly for tea, porcelain, and silk, which were in high demand in Europe. The problem for Britain, however, was that China did not need or want many British goods. This led to a significant trade imbalance, with silver flowing out of Britain to pay for Chinese products. In response, the British East India Company began exporting opium, produced in British-controlled India, to China in large quantities. Opium had been used for medicinal purposes in China for centuries, but its recreational use expanded dramatically as British traders increased its availability. By the early 19th century, millions of Chinese were addicted to the drug, leading to widespread social, economic, and health issues across the country. The First Opium War, 1839-1842. The First Opium War was precipitated by the Chinese government's efforts to halt the opium trade. In 1839, Lin Zechu, a high-ranking Chinese official, was appointed by the emperor to enforce a ban on opium. Lin took drastic measures, including confiscating and destroying over 20,000 chests of British opium stored in the port of Canton, modern-day Guangzhou. In response, the British government, motivated by both economic interests and a desire to assert its imperial power, sent a military expedition to China. The war, which began in November 1839, was marked by a series of naval battles between British forces and the Chinese Navy. Despite being vastly outnumbered, the British military had superior weaponry and technology, particularly steam-powered gunboats, which allowed them to easily defeat Chinese forces. The Qing dynasty, which had not invested significantly in modernizing its military, was unprepared for the scale of the British attack. The war ended in 1842 with the signing of the Treaty of Nanking. This treaty was highly unfavorable to China and marked the beginning of what is often referred to as the Century of Humiliation for the country. Under the terms of the treaty, China was forced to cede Hong Kong Island to Britain, pay a large indemnity, and open 5 ports, Canton, Xiamen, Fuzhou, Ningbo, and Shanghai, to British trade. The treaty also granted British citizens extraterritorial rights, meaning they were subject to British, rather than Chinese, law while in China. The Qing dynasty, weakened by the war and the treaty's conditions, struggled to maintain control over the country. The Second Opium War, 1856-1860. Tensions between China and Western powers did not dissipate after the First Opium War. The British government, along with France, sought further concessions from the Qing dynasty, particularly greater access to Chinese markets and the legalization of the opium trade. These demands culminated in the Second Opium War, which is also known as the Arrow War. The war began in 1856 when the Chinese authorities boarded a British-registered ship, the Arrow, in Canton and arrested several of its Chinese crew members on suspicion of piracy. The British government, viewing this as a violation of its extraterritorial rights, used the incident as a pretext to launch another military campaign against China. France joined the British in the conflict, using the murder of a French missionary as justification for its involvement. The Second Opium War followed a similar pattern to the first, with Western forces achieving decisive victories due to their technological superiority. In 1858, the Qing government signed the Treaty of Tianjin with Britain and France, agreeing to a range of new concessions. However, the treaty was not fully implemented, leading to renewed hostilities in 1859. In 1860, British and French forces captured Beijing and looted the Old Summer Palace, an event that remains a significant point of contention in Chinese-Western relations. The war ended with the signing of the Convention of Peking in 1860. Under this agreement, China was forced to cede additional territory, including the Kowloon Peninsula, to Britain, and to legalize the opium trade. The treaty also opened more Chinese ports to Western trade and allowed for the establishment of foreign embassies in Beijing, further undermining Chinese sovereignty. Consequences of the Opium Wars. The Opium Wars had profound and far-reaching consequences for China, the West, and the broader geopolitical landscape of East Asia. 1. Economic and social impact on China. The economic consequences of the Opium Wars were devastating for China. The forced opening of the country to foreign trade disrupted traditional industries, particularly in areas where opium consumption became widespread. The influx of cheap foreign goods, including opium, undermined local economies and contributed to a growing sense of instability. Moreover, the financial burden of paying indemnities to Britain and other Western powers drained the imperial treasury. The social consequences of the opium trade were equally severe. Millions of Chinese people became addicted to the drug, leading to widespread health problems, family breakdowns, and a loss of productivity. The opium crisis became a symbol of China's declining power and the inability of the Qing government to protect its people from foreign exploitation. 2. Foreign encroachment and unequal treaties. The Opium Wars marked the beginning of a period of significant foreign encroachment in China, often referred to as the unequal treaty era. The treaties signed at the end of the wars granted Western powers extensive privileges in China, including the right to trade in a growing number of Chinese ports, extraterritorial rights for foreign citizens, and control over key areas like Hong Kong. These concessions severely weakened China's sovereignty and made it vulnerable to further foreign intervention. Over the next several decades, other Western powers, as well as Japan, sought to extract similar concessions from China, often through the use of military force. By the end of the 19th century, China had become divided into spheres of influence controlled by various foreign powers. This period of humiliation and subjugation deeply affected Chinese national consciousness and would eventually contribute to the fall of the Qing dynasty and the rise of revolutionary movements. 3. The decline of the Qing dynasty. The Opium Wars exposed the weaknesses of the Qing dynasty and accelerated its decline. The Qing government, which had long prided itself on its ability to maintain order and stability within China, was unable to resist foreign military power or protect its people from the social and economic upheavals caused by the opium trade. The humiliation of defeat and the loss of sovereignty led to growing discontent among the Chinese population, particularly intellectuals, reformers, and revolutionaries. In the years following the Opium Wars, the Qing dynasty faced a series of internal challenges, including the Taiping Rebellion, 1850-1864, a massive civil war that further weakened the empire. Despite attempts at reform, such as the self-strengthening movement, the Qing government was unable to modernize its military or economy effectively, leaving it vulnerable to both internal and external threats. 4. The rise of Chinese nationalism. The Opium Wars played a significant role in the development of Chinese nationalism. The humiliation suffered by China at the hands of Western powers led to a growing sense of national consciousness and a desire for reform. Intellectuals and reformers began to call for the modernization of China's military, economy, and political institutions, as well as the removal of foreign influence from Chinese territory. By the early 20th century, these ideas had coalesced into a broader revolutionary movement, culminating in the Xinhai Revolution of 1911, which overthrew the Qing dynasty and established the Republic of China. The memory of the Opium Wars and the unequal treaties signed during this period continued to shape Chinese political thought and remained a powerful symbol of resistance to foreign imperialism. The Opium Wars were a pivotal moment in Chinese and world history. They marked the beginning of a long period of foreign domination and humiliation for China, leading to significant social, economic, and political upheavals. The wars exposed the weaknesses of the Qing dynasty and highlighted the growing power and influence of Western imperialist nations in Asia. For China, the Opium Wars were a catalyst for change, ultimately leading to the rise of Chinese nationalism and the eventual collapse of the imperial system. These conflicts also had broader implications for global trade, diplomacy, and the balance of power in the 19th century, making them a crucial chapter in the history of East-West relations.